She was standing in the middle of the most powerful man in Seoul's private residence when her daughter looked up at her and said, "Mummy, he's crying." Yemi Adeyinka looked at Park Il-suk, the most feared man in Korea. The man who had sent someone to her door 5 years ago to tell her the love of her life was dead. The man who had arranged her grief like it was a business transaction, packaged it neatly, and walked away without looking back at the damage. He was on his knees, in front of her daughter. And Jiyeon, her 5-year-old daughter with the warm mixed complexion, the small precise Korean features, the eyes that had haunted Yemi every single morning for 5 years because they were not her eyes. They had never been her eyes. They belonged to a dead man who was apparently not dead. Jiyeon was looking at this old dying man like she recognized something she had never been told existed. The old man reached out and touched her daughter's face with one trembling hand. And Yemi's legs almost gave out beneath her, because in that moment she understood everything. And then the door behind her opened, and the room went completely, devastatingly still. Because Park Jun-seo, the man she had buried, grieved, loved in secret for 5 years, and spent every waking hour trying to stop loving, was standing in the doorway, alive, looking at her, then looking at Jiyeon, then looking at his daughter's eyes, his own eyes, looking back at him. Welcome to Afro-Soul Connect. On today's episode, you get a dose of culture clash, forbidden love, family pressure, second chances, and an unforgettable reunion. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification icon so you never miss a new story when it drops. And don't forget to send this story to a friend or family member you think would love it. Also, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. To understand how Yemi Adeyinka ended up in that room, you have to go all the way back to Lagos. You have to go back to a Thursday night in November, 5 years earlier, when the emergency bay doors of St. Emmanuel Hospital in Victoria Island burst open, and the nurses on the night shift looked up to find 3 Korean men carrying a 4th one who was bleeding badly from his side and barely conscious. Yemi was 3 hours into a 12-hour shift. She was 24 years old. A trauma nurse with 2 years of experience and a reputation in that ward for being the person you wanted in the room when everything was going wrong. Not because she was the loudest or the most authoritative, because she was the one who did not panic, who assessed and moved and kept moving until the crisis was resolved. She had grown up the eldest of 4 children in a Lagos family where panicking was a luxury nobody could afford. She had learned early that calm was a choice, not a feeling, and that the choice was available even when the feeling underneath it was anything but calm. She took one look at the man they were carrying and started moving. "Get him on that table." What happened? The 3 Korean men looked at each other. The one who spoke English, barely, said something about a car accident. Yemi filed it immediately under things she did not believe, because the nature of his injuries did not say car accident. The positioning of the wounds, the specific trauma pattern, it said something else entirely. But that was not her concern tonight. Her concern was keeping him alive. She worked on him for 11 hours straight. She did not leave that bay for 11 hours. When the morning shift arrived at 6 and tried to relieve her, she told them she was fine, and kept working because something in her had locked into this particular fight in the specific irrational way that sometimes happens in medicine, where a patient stops being a case and becomes something you have personally decided not to lose. He was stable by 7 in the morning. She sat down for the first time in 11 hours and felt the exhaustion arrive all at once, the way exhaustion does when you finally give it permission. She looked at his face. He was unconscious. He would be unconscious for another 18 hours. But she looked at his face with the particular attention of someone who had just spent 11 hours fighting for something and wanted to understand what they had been fighting for. He was, even unconscious and damaged, the most striking man she had ever seen in a hospital bed. And she had seen many men in hospital beds. Korean, clearly. Sharp jaw, strong angular features, the kind of face that communicated authority even in complete stillness. He looked like a man who is not accustomed to the specific vulnerability of lying in someone else's care with no say in what happened to him next. Like someone who had spent his entire life being the most powerful person in every room and was currently in a room where that power was completely irrelevant. She felt, in a way she immediately told herself was due entirely to exhaustion, that she would very much like to know who he was. She went home and slept for 6 hours. When she came back for her afternoon shift, his eyes were open. He was looking at the ceiling with the specific, contained quality of a man who wakes up in an unfamiliar situation and assesses it completely before he reveals that he is awake. Gathering information. Calculating. Filing. She walked to his bed. "You're awake." He turned his head and looked at her. She was not prepared for what his eyes did up close and open. Dark, precise, moving across her face with an intelligence that was almost tangible, like being read by someone who read very quickly and understood everything they read. "You were my nurse." His English was careful and slightly accented, and entirely deliberate, like someone who had learned the language by deciding it was worth learning and had applied themselves to it completely. "I was." She picked up his chart. "How do you feel?" "Functional." She almost smiled at the ceiling. "That is not what I asked." A moment of quiet settled between them. "It is the most accurate answer I can offer." She looked at him then. "Can you tell me if you are in pain?" "Yes." "Are you in pain?" "Yes." "On a scale of?" "It does not matter." Not rudely. Simply, like someone stating an organizational policy. She looked at him over the chart. "It matters to me. It is literally my job for it to matter to me." He held her gaze. 4. She noted it. "Thank you." "You are welcome." A brief pause followed. "You saved my life." She kept writing on the chart. "I did my job." "That is not what I asked." She stopped writing. Looked at him. He had just returned her own words in her exact tone, and she was entirely sure he had done it on purpose. The smallest deliberate thing. But it caught her completely off guard. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I suppose I did save your life. Then I am in your debt." "You are in the hospital's debt. There will be a bill." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The idea of one. "I will see to it." "I know you will. You have 3 people in the waiting room who have been there for 12 hours and have not left. People who stay 12 hours tend to take care of bills." He looked at her for a moment. "You notice them." "I notice everything in my ward." He held her gaze with the specific quality of a man filing something he found useful. "My name is Park Jun-seo. Yemi Adeyinka." Without looking up. "Yemi." Testing the shape of it in his mouth. "Yes." And then the silence arrived between them, not empty, not awkward, but the specific quality of silence between 2 people who are both more comfortable with it than most. She finished writing in his chart. He looked at the ceiling. Neither of them moved to fill it. She left the bay. She thought about that silence for the rest of the shift. He stayed for 3 weeks. The nature of his injuries required it, and the consultant on his case was a man who did not negotiate his medical recommendations regardless of who the patient was or how quietly and precisely they communicated their preference to be discharged sooner. Jun-seo communicated this preference exactly twice. The consultant said no exactly twice. After the second no, Jun-seo did not ask again. He simply began working from his hospital bed with the specific efficient adaptation of someone who has reassessed a situation and decided to optimize within the available constraints. Yemi was assigned as his primary nurse for the duration. She told herself this was simply the assignment. She told herself this for approximately 4 days before she had to acknowledge, to herself and nobody else, that she looked forward to her shifts in a way she had not looked forward to anything in recent memory. By the end of the first week, she had learned the following about Park Jun-seo. He was precise in everything. The way he arranged the items on his bedside table. The way he asked questions, always one at a time, always waiting for the full answer before moving to the next one, never asking anything he was not genuinely interested in knowing. The way he read the documents his associate brought twice a day, reading them with the same neutral expression regardless of their contents, revealing nothing. He did not make small talk. It was not a social limitation. She understood quickly that it was a choice. When he spoke, it was because he had something to say. When he didn't, he was comfortable with the silence in a way that most people were not. He asked her questions. Specific ones that communicated he had been paying attention to things she had said earlier. Why trauma nursing? On the fourth day, while she was checking his sutures, she looked up. What made you ask that? You could have chosen any specialty. You are clearly good at the work. You could have chosen something with less urgency, more predictability. You chose the highest pressure option available. She considered him. I am good at urgency. That is not why. She finished with the sutures, set down the tools. My father had a heart attack when I was 17. He was home. I was the one who found him. I was the one who called the ambulance and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher and did what they told me to do.
She paused. He survived.
The doctor told us afterward that if I had panicked instead of following instructions, he would not have. Jun Seo was watching her with the full quality of his attention. You realized you were good at not panicking. I realized that being good at not panicking had a purpose, that the skill was worth building deliberately. So I built it. He was quiet for a moment before asking, How old are you? 24. You talk like someone older. You talk like someone who has been running things for a long time. A pause. 14 years. She looked at him. You have been running things since you were what? 18. Informally. 22, formally. She did not ask what kind of things. She understood that would be the wrong question. Is that why you don't make small talk? People who run things for a long time stop having time for conversations that go nowhere. And yet you have been talking to me for 15 minutes. He held her gaze. This conversation is going somewhere. She picked up her chart and left the bay before her face did something she would regret. By the end of the second week, she knew his sense of humor. Quiet, precise, arriving without announcement like someone had placed it in the room when she wasn't looking and left before they could be caught. She knew he slept exactly 6 hours and spent the remaining nighttime hours looking at the ceiling, thinking things he had clearly decided to think alone. She knew that one of the 3 men who visited twice daily was someone he trusted differently from the others. She could see it in the specific quality of the exchange, the way that one man was allowed to sit down when the other 2 stood. She knew she was in significant trouble. She was an eldest daughter from Lagos. She was practical by design. She had never once in 24 years allowed impractical feelings to run ahead of practical thinking. But something about this man made practical thinking feel like an argument she was losing. He was discharged on a Friday. She was professional about it. Went through the discharge checklist with the same focused attention she gave everything. Gave his associate the aftercare instructions. Said it had been good to have him as a patient. He looked at her for a moment. Thank you. Of course.
He left.
She went home. She cooked dinner. She told herself the ward would simply be the ward again now, and that would be perfectly fine. He came back on Saturday evening. He was wearing dark trousers and a plain charcoal shirt, and he looked outside of the hospital context, without the specific neutralization of the patient role, like something that had never come with enough warning. He walked into the ward where she was finishing her final round of documentation and sat down in the chair beside her station with the complete comfort of someone who had assessed the situation and decided this was exactly where he was going to be. Visiting hours ended at 6. She did not look up from the screen. I know. You cannot be in here. I know that too. I wanted to see if you were different outside of your working hours. She looked at him then. Are you different outside of your working hours?
No.
Then why would I be? I did not say I expected you to be. I said I wanted to see. And you are not different. You are exactly yourself. I have found this to be rare. She looked at him for a moment. She should have told him to leave. He was a former patient sitting in her ward after visiting hours, and she should have called security. She pulled her chair around, so it was facing his. What do you want, Park Juneseo? Currently.
Yes, currently.
At this specific moment. He looked at her with those dark, precise eyes that had been reorganizing her sense of professionalism since day 4 of his admission. I want to have a conversation with you that has nothing to do with my medical charts. I want to take you to dinner if you are willing, but I will accept this chair in this ward if you are not. A pause. And I want to understand how a 24-year-old trauma nurse from Lagos became the most interesting person I have been in a room with in a very long time. She held his gaze. That is 3 things. Yes. You said you only ask one question at a time. I made an exception. Given the circumstances. What circumstances? You are about to finish your shift. I have a limited window. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she saved her documentation, logged out of the system, and picked up her bag. There is a restaurant 2 streets over. The egusi soup is not as good as my mother's, but it is the best in this area, and the jollof rice will change your life. He stood. I have eaten jollof rice. Not this jollof rice. He almost smiled. Lead the way. And that was the beginning of the most significant 4 months of Yemi Adeyinka's life. What followed was the kind of relationship that builds so naturally you almost don't notice it happening until you are already inside it, and trying to imagine the shape of yourself without it has become difficult. They fell into a rhythm without discussing it. Evenings at the corner restaurant that started at 8 and ended at midnight when the last waiter very politely stopped refilling their water. Long conversations that went places she had not taken anyone, about her mother who held the family together with a stubbornness that Yemi had inherited and was simultaneously grateful for and exasperated by. About the specific loneliness of being the capable one, the one people brought their problems to, which meant your problems had nowhere comfortable to land. He listened to all of it, not with the performed attention of someone being polite, with the actual full attention of someone who found the content genuinely worth receiving and was not afraid to show it. And in return he gave her things. Not everything. She understood very quickly that there were dimensions of his life he was navigating around carefully, that the organization he ran and the nature of it and the specific history of the Park family were not things he was going to place on a restaurant table. She did not press it. She was a trauma nurse. She understood that some wounds were not ready to be touched and that the role of care was not always to demand a full inventory. But he gave her other things. He told her about his mother who died when he was 16 and who had been, he said in the quiet way, he said everything significant, the last person who had ever spoken to him without calculation of some kind. He told her about the specific loneliness of making decisions that affected other people's lives every day and never once being asked what the effect was on yours. He told her that he had not laughed, genuinely, not performatively, in a very long time before the restaurant 2 streets from the hospital. She was the one who made him laugh first. She told him about her first week in the trauma ward, the intern who fainted, the consultant who did not notice because he was busy arguing with his own reflection in the equipment, and June So had laughed. A real one. Short, slightly surprised at itself, like it had arrived without his permission. She had found that laugh extraordinary. She had told herself she had not and thought about it for 3 days. By month 3, she was not pretending anymore. She was completely, practically, inconveniently in love with a Korean man who ran things she did not ask about and who listened to her with the full quality of his attention and who had, over 12 weeks of evenings in a Lagos restaurant, become the architecture of her evenings in a way she had not noticed until she tried to imagine an evening without it. She also knew he had not told his family about her. She felt it in the careful way he handled any mention of Seoul. The way certain questions made him redirect without appearing to redirect. She understood that the relationship between what they were building and the world outside of it was not simple, and that he was navigating something she could not fully see. She had decided to give him time. She had also, though she had not told him yet, missed her period twice. She found out on a Tuesday morning. She sat in the bathroom of her apartment with the test in her hand and felt the specific seismic quality of a piece of information that divides your life into before and after. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She was also, she realized as she sat on the bathroom floor and held this information at arm's length first and then slowly brought it closer, entirely certain that she wanted this child. That underneath the fear and the complexity and the logistical enormity of what it meant, something in her was already organizing itself around this life with the specific fierce certainty of a woman who has made a decision. She needed to tell him. She was still finding the right words, the right order, the right moment, the right version of the conversation that accounted for everything she did not know about what it would cost him. When the phone call came, she was at work. The number was Korean. She stepped out of the ward. Ms. Adeyinka. The voice was male, Korean accented, formal. Not Junesio's voice. Someone else. Someone who had clearly prepared what they were going to say and was delivering it. Yes. I am calling on behalf of the Park family. I am very sorry to inform you that Park Jun-seo passed away earlier today following complications from injuries sustained in. She stopped hearing the rest of the sentence. She stood in the corridor of St. Emmanuel Hospital with the phone against her ear and felt the world do something to itself that she had no language for. Ms. Adeyinka, are you there? Yes. Her voice was entirely even. She was a trauma nurse. Her voice was always even. On behalf of the family, please accept our deepest condolences. What hospital? Which hospital in Seoul? A pause. I am afraid I am not able to. His full name. The attending physician. I need to verify. Ms. Adeyinka, I understand this is difficult. I need to verify the information. Her voice was still even. Her hand on the wall was not. The family has asked that. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor for 60 seconds. Then she walked back into the ward and finished her shift. It was the longest 9 hours of her life. She called his number from home that night. Disconnected. She called the number 6 more times over 3 days. Disconnected every time. She contacted the hospital, the one she knew from his admission, the one that had his records, and asked whether they had any emergency contact information. The administrator said the contacts associated with his file had been removed at discharge. She sat with the grief for 3 days. Real grief. The specific, terrible weight of it. The particular loss of someone you loved in a way that was still new enough to be tender before it had time to calcify into something manageable. On the 4th day, she understood that she was going to have to hold 2 things at once indefinitely. The grief and the life. The loss and the new beginning that was coming regardless of the loss. She chose the child. 8 months later, Ji-yeon arrived into the world at 6:47 in the morning. Warm mixed complexion, a head of dark hair, and her father's eyes looking up at Yemi from the first moment. His eyes.
Exactly.
Dark and precise and already impossibly seeming to be gathering information. Yemi held her daughter and felt the specific compound emotion of the most joy she had ever experienced arriving at the same time as the most profound grief. Because the eyes looking at her were the eyes of a man, she could not tell about this. She named her Ji-yeon. She had spent 3 weeks choosing the name. She had sat with Korean naming books, something she had never expected to do, because she had decided her daughter deserved to carry both worlds from the beginning. 3 months after Ji-yeon was born, the first transfer arrived. A significant amount. Clinical in its precision. Enough to cover 2 years of childcare, living expenses, medical costs. Not a gesture. A calculation. Yemi looked at the transfer notification for a long time. Then she transferred every single naira back. No note. No explanation. She did not need to explain. The returning was the explanation. The following month the transfer came again. She sent it back. Month after month, for 2 years. The same amount arriving. The same amount leaving. Not a word exchanged. Just this silent exchange of a family trying to pay for a wrong and a woman refusing to allow the wrong to be paid for. After 2 years, they stopped sending it. She took the stopping as the confirmation of what she had suspected since Ji-yeon was born. The death story was arranged. The disconnected number was arranged. The entire architecture of her grief was arranged by someone with access to sufficient resources to both create it and then attempt to compensate for it. She did not know who. She suspected.
But she did not know.
She built her life on the refusal. She built it with the specific stubborn precision of a woman who had decided that she and her daughter were the only foundation they needed. She worked. She raised Ji-yeon. She was present at her daughter's first word, which was not mama or dada, but something that sounded remarkably like the Yoruba word for water, which Yemi chose to take as evidence of good character. She was present at Ji-yeon's first steps, at the first day of nursery school, at the first time Ji-yeon looked up from the picture book they were reading together and said, with the forensic curiosity of a child who has decided to pursue a line of inquiry, "Mummy, where's my daddy?" Yemi put the book down. She had been preparing for this question for 2 years. She had the answer ready. Your daddy is in heaven, baby. He was a very good man who loved you before you were even born. And you have his eyes. Ji-yeon looked at her for a long moment with those precise dark eyes that were simultaneously the most beloved and most painful thing Yemi looked at every day. What did he look like? He looked like you, but taller. Ji-yeon seemed to find this satisfactory for the moment and went back to the book. Yemi looked at the ceiling and breathed. Ji-yeon was 5 years old, and her questions were getting more specific when the letter arrived from Seoul. It was not a transfer. Transfers arrived digitally, anonymously, and were returned the same way. This was a letter. Actual paper, in an envelope with a Seoul address and a name. Park Il-suk. She opened it standing at her kitchen counter. It was brief. Formal.
Clear.
He was dying. Kidney failure. He had 18 months at the time of writing. He suspected he had less now. He was writing because there was something he needed to say that he did not trust to intermediaries and something he needed to ask that he understood he had no standing to ask. He wanted to meet Ji-yeon. He hadn't closed a photograph. She almost did not look at it. She looked at it. It was a photograph of Park Jun-seo at what looked like 25 or 26. Standing at a window somewhere in Seoul. Dark, sharp-jawed, precise, looking at something outside the frame with the specific quality of his attention. She had not seen his face in 5 years. She sat down. She sat at her kitchen table and held a photograph of the man she had been told was dead and felt 5 years of carefully constructed grief do something violent and unexpected in her chest. Because the grief that she had built around a dead man was not the same as the grief that was possible around a man who might be alive. Something about the death story had never added up. She had known it from the beginning. The disconnected number too fast. The call too formal and too brief. The transfers that communicated very specific knowledge of her situation. A dead man's family would not know she was pregnant 3 months after his death unless someone had been watching her before the call. She had filed the doubt. She had lived with the doubt. She had decided, practically, that pursuing the doubt would require hoping for something that could not be confirmed, and that hoping for unconfirmable things was a dangerous way to raise a child. But the letter was not unconfirmable. The letter was a dying man's address. She booked 2 flights to Seoul. Not because she had forgiven anything, not because she trusted anything, but because Ji-yeon deserved the whole truth of who she was. And because Yemi Adeyinka had spent 5 years being practical about her grief, and she was going to Seoul to find out whether her grief was built on something real or something arranged. She told Ji-yeon they were going on an adventure. Ji-yeon packed Director Kwon, her toy elephant, precisely dressed, in her carry-on bag and asked the flight attendant 17 questions before they reached cruising altitude. Yemi looked out the plane window at the clouds and felt the specific terrifying quality of moving toward a thing you have been afraid to know for 5 years. She was afraid. She was also, underneath the fear, something she had not let herself be in a very long time. She was ready. Seoul was nothing like Yemi had imagined. She had imagined cold, distant, a city built in the image of the family she was flying toward. But Seoul in October was golden and overwhelming and full of a specific energy that felt like the whole city had somewhere to be and was not particularly concerned about whether you could keep up. Ji-yeon pressed her small face against the taxi window and narrated everything she saw with the focused enthusiasm of a child who has decided she is going to understand this city completely and has budgeted approximately 45 minutes for the task. Mummy, look at that building. Mummy, why is the writing different from English writing? Mummy, that man is eating something on a stick. Mummy, can I have something on a stick? Mummy, how many people live here? Mummy. Ji-yeon. Yes, Mummy. One question at a time. Ji-yeon considered this. The building first, then the stick food. Yemi looked out the window and felt the impossible layering of it. This city that was half of her daughter's heritage, that Ji-yeon was seeing for the first time with the precise, curious eyes she had inherited from a man Yemi had spent 5 years thinking was dead. The Park family residence in Songbuk-dong communicated wealth the way old power always communicated it, through the quality of what it did not need to show you. High walls, immaculate gardens visible through an iron gate, a quiet that was not empty but deliberate. The kind of quiet that required significant resources to maintain. Mr. Shin, The Park family representative who had met them at arrivals with Ji-yeon's name on a card spoke to the gate intercom and said nothing to Yemi except that they had arrived and that Mr. Park was expecting them. Ji-yeon looked at the gate with great interest. Are we visiting someone important? Yes. How important? Very important. Ji-yeon processed this. Should I have worn my smarter dress? You look perfect. Ji-yeon adjusted Director Kwon under her arm with the confidence of a child who has accepted this assessment and moved on. They were led through a hallway that confirmed everything the exterior had suggested: dark wood, high ceilings, artwork on the walls that Yemi did not look at because she was rehearsing. She was rehearsing the words she had prepared. The clear, direct, unemotional account of what had been done to her and what she expected from this meeting. She had the words ready. She lost every single one of them when they walked into the room and she saw him. Park Il-suk was nothing like the man she had built in her mind. 5 years of imagining the person who arranged her grief had constructed someone enormous, intimidating, someone whose physical presence matched the scale of what he had done. A villain, essentially, with the posture of a villain. The man in the chair by the window was old and diminished and dying and looked all three. He was perhaps 70. His hands on the arms of the chair were thin in the way that illness makes hands thin, like the flesh is being slowly recalled. His shoulders carried the specific collapse of someone whose body has stopped cooperating. But his eyes were entirely, completely himself. Dark and sharp and moving across the room with the precision of someone who had been reading situations for 60 years and had not lost the ability simply because his body was failing around it. He looked at Yemi. Then he looked at Ji-yeon. And Yemi watched his face and saw the moment he encountered his granddaughter for the first time. It did not look like what she had expected. She had expected guilt. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps the cold assessment of a man calculating what this moment required. What she saw instead was something that had no calculation in it at all. His face simply broke. Quietly. Not with sound or performance. The specific quiet breaking of a face that has been held in controlled expression for a very long time, suddenly losing the ability to hold it in the presence of something it had arranged to never encounter. Ji-yeon was looking at him with the frank curiosity of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to look away from interesting things. Yemi watched Park Il-suk lower himself, slowly, with obvious effort, with the visible argument of a body that no longer moved the way he told it to, from the chair to his knees. On the floor, in front of her daughter, the most feared man in Korea, on his knees in front of a 5-year-old with an elephant under her arm. Annyeonghaseyo. His voice was rough and carrying something heavier than the word. Ji-yeon looked at Yemi. Mummy, what did he say? He said hello. And her voice, somehow, stayed even. Ji-yeon looked back at the man on the floor. She was studying him the way she studied everything, with complete focused attention, gathering data, forming conclusions. Hello, she said carefully. He looked at her face. Just looked at it, at the specific architecture of her features, the Korean precision of them, the shape of her eyes, her jaw. Looking at something he had known existed for 5 years in the form of a surveillance photograph and was now encountering as a living, breathing child who was looking right back at him. He reached out his hand slowly, with the quality of a movement that is asking rather than taking. And he touched her cheek. Yemi grabbed the doorframe. Because she had come here to be controlled and precise and to get the information she needed and to leave. She had not come here to feel anything for this man. She had organized herself, carefully, against feeling anything for this man. But Ji-yeon was 5 years old and had never had a grandfather, and the old man on the floor in front of her was looking at her child with an expression that contained the full weight of everything he had arranged and everything it had cost him, and Yemi was a human being, and some walls are simply not tall enough. Mummy, he's crying. Factually. Not distressed. Just reporting. I know, baby. Why is he crying? She could not answer that yet. Mr. Shin appeared with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been briefed for this exact moment and took Ji-yeon gently by the hand. He spoke to her softly in Korean and English, something about a special room with toys that had been prepared specifically. Ji-yeon, who was 5 and had the magnificent unsentimentality of small children when the promise of toys was involved, assessed the situation, and decided to go. She gave one backward look at the man on the floor. He can come see the toys later if he wants. If he stops crying, I will tell him. And then the room was just the two of them. Park Il-suk remained on his knees for a moment longer. Then, with the visible struggle of a man whose body was working against him in every direction, he raised himself back into the chair. The effort of it took 30 seconds and cost him something visible. He looked at Yemi. Sit down. She stayed standing. You have the right to remain standing. You have many rights in this room that I cannot dispute. She said nothing. The silence lasted a moment. You returned every transfer. Every one. For 2 years. Every single one. She wanted each word of that to land separately. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man receiving something he had been carrying the knowledge of and was only now allowing himself to feel the full weight of. I have thought about those returns for 3 years. Good. Every month when it came back, I thought about what it meant that you sent it back. And what did you decide it meant? That you were the kind of woman who understood that some things cannot be paid for, and that you were refusing to allow me to attempt it. She held his gaze. You decided that after 3 years. I understood it from the first return. It took me 3 years to admit that understanding it and sitting with what it said about what I had done were two different things. Yemi looked at him. You're going to tell me you are sorry. You're going to tell me you regret what you did, and you are dying, and you want to make peace with it. I need you to understand something before you say any of those things. He waited. I did not come here for your peace. I came here for Ji-yeon. I came here because she deserves the whole truth of who she is, including the parts that are difficult. I came here because a 5-year-old should not grow up with a blank space where half of her history should be. She kept her voice level with the effort of someone who has been practicing this. What I am going to need from you is truth. Not a managed version of it. Not the version that makes you feel better about what you did. The actual truth. All of it. Yes.
Simply.
Start from the beginning. And he did. He told her everything. About the call Junus-yo made from Lagos 3 months into his stay. The call Park Il-suk had not been expecting. The 40 minutes of his son talking about a woman in a way he had never heard Junus-yo talk about anything. How his son had sounded on that call like a man who had found something that made everything else negotiable. And how that specific thing, the negotiability of everything else, had terrified Park Il-suk more than anything the organization had ever faced. You were afraid. Yes. Of me. Of what he was becoming with you. Of who he was allowing himself to be. My son had been running this organization since he was 22. He had never allowed himself to be open, unguarded. The man on that phone call was unguarded in ways that in my world represent the most dangerous state a person can be in. So, you decided to remove the danger. I told myself I was protecting him. Were you protecting him or protecting the organization? He looked at his hands. Both. I told myself both. I have had 5 years to understand that it was mostly the organization. A pause. And that I was also afraid of losing him, of who he might become if he had something outside of the family that mattered more to him than the family. You were afraid he might choose me. I was afraid he might choose himself, Park Il-suk said. A version of himself that did not fit what I had built. And I could not allow that. So, I removed the circumstances that were producing that version of him. She was quiet for a long moment. You removed me. You removed Ji-yeon before she even existed. You removed 5 years of his life that he should have had.
She stopped.
Controlled herself. How did you do it? The death story. How did you arrange it so completely that his number was disconnected before I could even verify what you told me? He told her. The mechanics of it. The specific resources of an organization with reach across multiple countries. The people who handled it on his instruction. The call that was made. The number that was redirected and then disconnected. The message that was delivered to Junus-yo. A carefully constructed account of Yemi ending the relationship, wanting no contact, moving on. He believed it for 2 years. He believed it because he had no reason not to. And because he paused. Because I told him that I had seen the message, that I had been there when she. You told him you saw a message from me. Yes. There was no message.
No.
The word landed flat and final. There was not. Silence. For 2 years he thought I chose to leave. And he stayed in the organization. He ran everything. He was not well, Park Il-suk said quietly. The first year, I told myself it was the recovery from his injuries. It was not the injuries. She closed her eyes. And then he started looking. After 2 years, when he had enough standing and enough independence to begin asking questions I could not easily answer. He started with the hospital records, then the contact details from his Lagos trip. I had had those removed. He noticed they were removed. He knew something was wrong.
Yes.
He told me directly. 3 years ago he came to me and told me that the story did not make sense and that he needed to understand what had actually happened. I deflected. He came back. I deflected again. The old man looked at the window. I am not proud of those conversations. I was watching my son look for the truth about the most significant relationship of his life, and I was actively preventing him from finding it. Why did you stop? Why the letter? Why now? He was quiet for a moment before he answered. Because I am dying. And the arithmetic changes when you are dying. I have spent 68 years making decisions for other people, deciding what they needed, what was good for them, what the correct arrangement of their lives was. I was good at it. The organization is evidence that I was good at it.
A pause.
But sitting in this chair watching the months count down, the only decisions I can review that give me any peace are the ones where I listen to someone else instead of deciding for them. And I have very few of those. He looked at his hands again. I want my son to have what I took from him. I want Ji-yeon to know where she comes from. He stopped. I want to see that child, not to make peace with myself. Because she is my blood, and I arranged to never know her, and I am running out of time to fix that. Yemi looked at him for a long time. She showed up. That is all I will say. You asked to see her. She is here. What you do with that is between you and her and Junesio. His voice changed slightly at the name. He does not know you are here. She went very still.
He is in this building.
He arrived 2 days ago from Tokyo. He comes when I call him. Not because things between us are resolved. Because he is that kind of man. A pause. He does not know about Ji-yeon. He does not know I sent for you. He does not know about his daughter.
No.
She absorbed this. And you were planning to what? Have us both here and wait for him to find us. I was planning to tell you everything first, and then ask you how you wanted to handle the rest. She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a full 30 seconds looking at the Songbukdong garden below, immaculate, formal, entirely Park Il-suk, and breathing. How long has he been here? Since Thursday. And he has no idea. None. She turned around. You need to tell him. Before he walks into this room from somewhere and finds me here, without any context. You need to tell him that. The door opened, and the room went completely, devastatingly still. Park Junesio was standing in the doorway. He was 32 years old, and he had become, in the 5 years since she last saw him, exactly what she had always suspected he would become. Taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply forgotten the specific quality of his height. Dark suit, no tie, his hair slightly longer. The specific contained authority of him was a physical thing that arrived before he did. He was looking at his father. Then he looked at Yemi. And everything on his face that was controlled and managed and precise fell away in a single second. Yemi. Just her name. Nothing else. Like confirming that the room was real, that she was real, that this was actually happening and not the specific version of this he had apparently been imagining for 3 years. She stood in the center of the room and looked at the man she had grieved for 5 years and felt everything she had built around that grief tilt. You're alive. The words were insufficient. She knew they were insufficient. They were the only words available. Yes. He stepped into the room. His eyes moved from her face to his father. And the warmth that had arrived at seeing Yemi drained away and became something cold and specific in the way it was directed at Park Il-suk. What is happening? Not a question. She came. I can see that. His eyes came back to Yemi and the warmth returned. Softer now, more careful, like something that needed to be handled correctly. Why are you here? How are you here? How long? Your father sent for me. He looked at his father. You sent for her. Quiet. Flat. The quiet of something very large, holding itself in. Yes. After, he stopped himself. Looked at Yemi again. Are you alright? Did he? How long have you been here? We arrived today. His eyes sharpened.
We. She paused.
It was the smallest pause. Less than a second. But he caught it. She could see him catch it, could see the precise mind behind the precise eyes lock onto it immediately. Yemi. Quietly. Are you alone? She looked at him. She looked at the man she had loved and lost and built a life without, and who was standing in front of her alive and breathing and looking at her with the full quality of his attention that had always made her feel like the most important thing in any room she shared with him. She made her decision.
No.
I'm not alone. The silence that followed had texture and weight and temperature. He looked at his father again. Park Il-suk held his son's gaze without flinching. And she watched Jun Seo. Watched the exact moment the calculation completed itself in his mind. Watched him arrive at the answer from the available information. Watched his expression do something she had never seen it do in the entire time she had known him. It became completely unguarded. Every layer of management and control and organizational precision that had been part of his face for as long as she had known him simply left. Like weather clearing. How old?
To her.
Not to his father. 5. He made no sound. He went still with the specific quality of stillness she had seen him deploy in her hospital ward, the kind that meant he was holding something very large very carefully until he could put it down in the right place. 5 years old. Yes. And you. A pause. You raised her. Yes. Alone. Yes.
He looked at his father.
What crossed his face in that moment was not something she wanted to watch. She looked at the wall. Get out.
To his father.
Quietly. Entirely. Park Il-suk looked at him. I need to speak to her. Alone.
Get out.
His father got up from the chair. Slowly, painfully, without argument. He moved toward the door. He paused beside Yemi. Her name. Almost to himself. What is her name? Yemi looked at him. Jian. Something moved through his expression that she had no language for. Jian, he repeated, like placing something carefully in a pocket for safekeeping.
Then he left.
And they were alone for the first time in 5 years. Jun Seo stood on one side of the room and Yemi stood on the other, and the distance between them was not large and was enormous, and neither of them moved for a long time. Then he crossed the room. He did not stop at a managed distance. He walked all the way to her and stood close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to meet his eyes, and she was immediately furious at how much she had missed the specific geometry of being near him. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Do not leave anything out.
So she did.
She told him about the phone call. The formal voice and the precise condolences, and the line going dead before she could ask a single question. She told him about calling his number 7 times. About going to the hospital's administration. About the 3 days of sitting in her apartment, unable to do anything but breathe. She told him about the transfers. Every single one. And about returning every single one. She told him about Jian. About the night she was born, and what it felt like to hold a child who had his eyes. About watching Jian grow, and seeing him and her daughter every day, in the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, in the precise way she asked questions, in the specific quality of her attention. She told him everything. And he listened the way he had always listened to her, with the full and complete quality of his attention, without interrupting, without looking away. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. I called you. His voice was different, more careful. When I came out of recovery. Your number was already disconnected. He arranged it. Yes. A pause. He told me you had sent a message through the hospital, that you did not want to be contacted. I never sent any message. I know that now. Did you believe it? When he told you. He was quiet for a moment. Not entirely. Something about it did not fit. You do not end things with a message. You're not that kind of person. I knew that even then. He paused. But I was recovering. I was in Seoul, and the organization was in a difficult period, and my father was handling everything, and he stopped. I chose, for 2 years, to accept the explanation because pursuing the alternative would have cost me something I was not ready to cost myself. What would it have cost you? Having to believe my father was capable of this.
Simply.
She looked away. And then 3 years ago, I was not willing to accept it anymore. I started looking.
Properly.
Every lead went cold. I found out 6 months ago that the leads were not cold. They were being buried. He was blocking you. Yes. She closed her eyes. 3 years. You spent 3 years looking for a woman you were told ended your relationship. Yes.
Why?
Most men would have. I am not most men. Not arrogantly.
Simply.
And you are not most women. What you would have done if you had ended things, you would have told me yourself. You would have looked at me and said the words and let me respond, and it would have been a conversation, not a hospital message and a disconnected number. I knew from the first week that something was wrong. I chose to wait until I was ready to face what that meant. And while I waited, you were in Lagos raising our daughter alone, and he stopped. He turned away. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders and understood what was happening. This was the specific thing that happened to a controlled person when the full weight of something they have not had time to prepare walls for arrives all at once. She walked to him. She did not plan to. She was simply there, standing beside him at the window, not touching him, just close, because some part of her that 5 years of deliberately moving on had not been able to reach was still oriented toward this man like a compass that only knew one direction. Junesio.
He turned.
And they were very close. And his face had everything in it that he had not said, the full 5-year weight of the looking and the not finding and the arriving and the understanding what he had missed and knowing he could not get it back. I am sorry. You didn't. I made choices. 2 years of choices to wait instead of push. That is on me. Some portion of everything is on me. She looked at him. She has your eyes. From the first moment she was born, she had your eyes. I looked at her and saw you, and I did not know for a very long time whether that was going to be the thing that helped me raise her or the thing that made it impossible. Which was it?
Both.
Every single day, both. He reached out. His hand came up slowly, the specific movement of a man who understands he has no right to assume and is asking permission with the quality of the reach. His fingers touched her jaw. Just lightly. Just the specific way you touch something you thought you had lost and are not yet fully sure is real. She did not move away. Tell me about her. Everything. What she is like. What she does. What she loves. And Yemi, who had spent 5 years raising this child alone and had never had anyone to tell this to, not in the specific way, not to the person who mattered, began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes. About the first word. About the way Ji-yeon approached problems with an unsettling methodical precision for a toddler. About the business formal phase she had entered at 3, the insistence on what she called professional presentation, the brief period where she had attempted to dress the cat in a collar because it was not serious enough. About the elephant named Director Kwon and the specific organizational philosophy Ji-yeon had developed around him. About the day Ji-yeon came home from nursery and told Yemi very seriously that she had conducted a review of the other children's approaches to building blocks and found them insufficiently strategic. Juneso listened to every word, and as she talked, she watched something happen to his face. Slowly in degrees. The grief and the devastation of what he had missed were still there. She could see them clearly. But underneath them, arriving without his permission in the specific way that Ji-yeon arrived in most situations, was something else. Something that looked like wonder. She sounds like you. When she paused. She sounds like both of us. Wait until you see her organize something. He looked at her. I want to see her organize something. I want to see everything. He stopped. He held her gaze for a moment. There is something you need to do. Yes. You need to meet your daughter. And the thing that moved across his face at those words, the full, unguarded arrival of it, was the most extraordinary thing she had seen on a human face in a very long time. Ji-yun was in the middle of a comprehensive structural critique of the toy elephant selection in the prepared playroom when Jun-seo walked through the door. She stopped talking. She looked at him. He stood in the doorway of the playroom and looked at his daughter for the first time, and Yemi stood behind him and watched his face and forgot, for a moment, to breathe. Ji-yun had his eyes. She had always had his eyes. But standing in a room with both of them simultaneously, Yemi understood something she had not been able to understand from memory alone. It was not just the color or the shape. It was the quality. The specific way those eyes moved across something new, gathering, assessing, filing, was identical in both of them. Father and daughter. The same precise attention. The same exact quality of intelligence moving behind the same exact eyes. They were looking at each other with their own eyes. Ji-yun tilted her head. The specific head tilt that Yemi had been looking at for 5 years and had always known was not from her. You look like me. Jun-seo made a sound that didn't become a word. Your eyes, Ji-yun said, pointing with Director Kwon. They look exactly like mine. He crouched down, all the way to her level, in the specific movement his father had made an hour earlier, and something about the parallel, the two Park men crouching to meet Ji-yun at her height, went straight through Yemi's chest. He looked at his daughter at eye level for the first time.
Yes.
They do. Ji-yun studied him with the forensic interest of a child who has identified a significant data point and intends to understand it fully. Are you Korean? Yes. I am half Korean. My daddy was Korean, but he died before I was born, so I never met him. The room went entirely quiet. Jun-seo looked at Yemi over Ji-yun's head. She met his gaze. This was the moment she had not fully planned for. The specific logistics of telling a 5-year-old that the father she had been told was dead was currently crouching in front of her. She had thought about it on every leg of the flight to Seoul and had arrived at nothing that felt right. There was no right version. There was only the true version. She crouched beside Ji-yun. Baby, I need to tell you something important. Ji-yun gave her full attention. This was one of Ji-yun's qualities that Yemi had always found both remarkable and slightly unnerving. When she decided something was important, she became completely, terrifyingly present for it. You know how Mummy told you before we came to Seoul that we were going to meet some people who were connected to your daddy? You said his family. Ji-yun said precisely.
Yes.
His family. Yemi paused. She looked at Jun-seo. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has placed something infinitely precious in someone else's hands because she is the only person who knows how to hold it correctly. This man in front of you, he is not just your daddy's family, baby. He is your daddy. Ji-yun looked at Jun-seo. She looked at him for a long moment. But daddy died. Someone made a mistake and told Mummy he died. But he didn't.
He has been alive.
And he is here. And he very much wants to know you. Ji-yun looked at Jun-seo with the specific serious attention she brought to new and significant information. Then she did the thing that undid every adult in the room. She reached out and placed her small hand flat against his cheek, pressing slightly, testing the warmth and the solidity of it. Jun-seo froze. You're warm. Dead people are cold. I know because of the fish. She paused. We had a fish. His name was Barrister Chukwu. Mummy said he went to heaven, but he was cold first. Jun-seo's eyes were doing something Yemi had never seen them do in all the time she had known him. Are you really my daddy?
Directly.
Because Ji-yun did everything directly. Yes. His voice was barely there. She considered this. Do you live in Seoul? Yes. And that is why your eyes look like mine. Because I'm half from here. Yes. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this resolution. She went back to Director Kwon. You can sit down if you want, she told Jun-seo, gesturing at the floor beside her with the authority of a host. I am assessing the structural integrity of this elephant's wardrobe. I could use a second opinion. He sat on the floor. He sat cross-legged on the floor of a playroom in Seoul and looked at the daughter he had never met, who had just invited him to sit beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world, and something in him that had been held under extraordinary tension for 3 years simply let go. Yemi stood in the doorway and watched. She watched his face as Ji-yeon introduced him to Director Kwon and explained the corporate hierarchy she had developed around him. She watched him listen with the full quality of his attention, the same attention he had always given her, turned now completely toward this small person who was half him and had no idea what an extraordinary thing that was. She watched him follow Ji-yeon's logic about the pocket square and accept the red crayon and sit there, the most feared man in Seoul, on a playroom floor adding accessories to a toy elephant because his 5-year-old daughter asked him to. She watched him fall in love with Ji-yeon in real time. She saw the exact moment it became irreversible, when Ji-yeon, without looking up from Director Kwon, said, "You hold the crayon wrong," and reached over and adjusted his grip with the matter-of-fact authority of a child who has decided this is her business and corrected it without ceremony. Jun So looked at his hand, then at Ji-yeon. "I have been told that before." "By who?" "My primary school teacher." Ji-yeon considered this. Was she very strict? Very. Good. Strict teachers are more useful. He looked at Yemi over Ji-yeon's head. She was already looking away at the ceiling. He stood eventually and came to stand beside her in the doorway. They both watched Ji-yeon conduct an assessment of the second toy elephant's posture and find it wanting. "She is extraordinary." "Yes. She is exactly," he paused. "She is exactly what I would have expected and completely nothing like what I imagined." That is Ji-yeon's primary talent. She is always simultaneously exactly what you should have predicted and entirely surprising. He was quiet for a moment. She accepted it very quickly. "Knowing I am her father. She is 5. And you have her eyes." Those two facts were sufficient evidence. He turned to look at her. "Yemi." "Yes. I have missed so much." "Yes. I cannot," he stopped. "There is no version of this where I get those years back." "No. But I am here now." He held her gaze. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Whatever that looks like. Whatever shape it takes. Whatever you need it to be or not be. I am here." She looked at him. "I spent 5 years building a life that did not have space for you in it. Because it had to work. Because Ji-yeon needed it to work. I built it specifically without space because leaving space would have meant hoping, and I could not afford to hope." "I know. And now you are standing here alive and she stopped. "You don't know what to do with the space." "I did not build any." "Then let me help you."
Slowly. Carefully.
"In whatever way you can allow. Let me stand near what you built and show you that I am worth making room for." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very specific ask. I have had 3 years to think about what I would say to you if I ever found you. I have thought about it more than I have thought about anything else. And that is what you arrived at? Among other things. Some of them less appropriate for a playroom." She looked at him. He held her gaze steadily. "Jun Seo." "Yes. I am still angry. I know. I am angry at the years. At what was taken. At Ji-yeon growing up without." She stopped. Breathed. "I am angry at the waste of it."
Yes.
"So am I." But she looked at Ji-yeon, who had now decided that Jun Seo needed to come back and help with the second elephant. "I am also very, very glad you are not dead." He looked at her. "I have been told that the specific quality of glad you feel when you realize someone you thought was gone is actually alive, that it is different from any other kind of glad." "It is. I would like to know everything about that. If you will tell me." She looked away. "Ji-yeon is calling you." "Daddy." Ji-yeon called from the floor. The word arrived with complete casualness, as if she had been using it for years. They both went very still. She had called him Daddy. Just like that. No deliberation. No ceremony. She had decided the word was applicable and used it. Jun Seo turned back to look at Yemi. His face was doing the unguarded thing again. "Go." Her voice was slightly unsteady. "She needs help with the second elephant."
He went.
He sat back on the floor, and Ji-yeon immediately handed him a crayon and began explaining her vision, and he listened with the full quality of his attention, and Yemi stood in the doorway of a playroom in Seoul and felt the wall she had spent 5 years building develop its first crack. Now I need to stop the story here for a second. because things are about to get very complicated in that house. Drop a comment right now and tell me, is Park Il-suk a villain or a tragic figure? Because he arranged 5 years of pain. But he is also the reason they are standing in the same room right now. And what do you think Ji-yeon is going to do when she fully understands what her grandfather did? That child is not going to stay quiet about it. Tell me your thoughts and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to hear everything. Now let's get back to the story. The conversation with Park Il-suk happened the following morning. Jun Seo had barely slept. Yemi knew this because she had also barely slept, and at 3 in the morning when she padded quietly to the kitchen of the guest wing to make tea, she found him already there. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of something untouched in front of him, looking at the table surface with the expression of a man who has been sitting with something enormous for several hours and has not yet found the right way to put it down. He looked up when she came in. They looked at each other. Tea. Yes. She made it. She set it in front of him. She sat across from him.
How is she?
Yeah.
She slept immediately. She told me this had been a productive day, and she needed to rest before tomorrow's activities. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. What are tomorrow's activities? She has not informed me yet, but based on how she has been operating since we landed, I expect a schedule will be presented at breakfast. He looked at his tea. She called me daddy. Yes. She said it like she had been saying it for years. She decided it was accurate and applied it. That is how she operates. She does not audition words. She decides, and then she uses them. He looked at her. Where did she get that? Yemi held his gaze. Both of us, I think. He was quiet for a moment. I keep trying to calculate it. 5 years. I keep trying to understand what 5 years means in terms of what she is, what she learned, what happened. And I cannot, he paused. I was not there. I don't know the timeline of her. I know the result. I met the result this afternoon, and the result is extraordinary. But I don't know the path of it, how she became who she is. Then ask. I will tell you everything. Every year. Every phase. Every version of her. I have wanted to tell someone for 5 years, and there was no one to tell it to who would understand what it meant. She paused. I will tell you everything. He looked at her across the kitchen table in the 3 in the morning quiet. Yemi. Yes. Thank you for coming here. For bringing her. For not, he stopped. You had every reason to never come near anything connected to my family again. You had every reason to protect yourself and her from all of us, and simply never look back. She has a right to know where she comes from.
Yes.
But you could have told her in a way that did not require you to be in this house. You came yourself. You brought her yourself. He looked at his hands. That required something from you that I understand the full size of. I need you to know I understand the full size of it. She looked at the table. Tell me about the 3 years.
Tell me what that was like.
Looking. He was quiet for a moment. Then he began to talk. He told her about the first year, the year he had accepted the explanation because accepting it was survivable and pursuing the alternative was not something he was ready for. The way he had moved through that year, with the specific efficient productivity of someone who has redirected everything into work, because work is the one thing that cannot betray you. He told her about the specific night in the second year when he was in Tokyo for a meeting and something happened. Nothing dramatic, simply the ordinary coincidence of a restaurant, a Nigerian woman at the next table who laughed at something in a particular way, and he had spent the rest of the evening unable to work and unable to sleep, and unable to continue pretending that the explanation made sense. He told her about going to his father and asking directly, about the deflection and the redirection, and the growing understanding that the deflections were too smooth to be genuine, about the 18 months of looking, quietly at first, then increasingly determined, and about the cold trails that turned out to be buried ones. He told her about 6 months ago when he finally confirmed that his own father had been blocking him. That conversation, he said, was the reason their relationship was currently what it was. What is it currently? Functional. We manage what needs to be managed. He is my father. He is dying. I do not abandon people because it is inconvenient to be with them.
He paused.
But I have not forgiven him. And he knows I have not forgiven him. And we operate within that understanding. Until yesterday. Until yesterday, he agreed. When I walked into that room and he stopped. Arranged something again.
Yes.
Although this time, he looked at her. This time I cannot entirely be angry about the arrangement. She held his gaze. He wanted to fix it. Yes. Does wanting to fix something make it not have happened?
No.
Nothing makes it not have happened. I know that. But he paused. Ji-yeon is in that playroom with the elephant in the business suit. You are at this table at 3 in the morning making tea. These things are real, and they are here, and whatever my father's methods were, these things exist because of them. He looked at his hands. I am trying to be honest about that. The ends and the means are both things I have to hold at once. She was quiet. He is going to apologize to you. Formally. In words. I told him he needed to. He looked at her. You told my father what he needed to do.
Yes.
He needed to hear it from someone who was not going to manage the telling. I did not manage it. Something happened on his face. I imagine you did not. He needs to say it to you too. Not an explanation. An acknowledgement. You deserve to hear from him that what he did was wrong. Not why, you know why. Simply that it was wrong, and that he knows it was wrong. Yes. Quietly. And then Ji-yeon deserves whatever he is left to give her. She has months, maybe, with a grandfather who is the only living connection to half of who she is. I am not going to let my anger take that from her. She will make her own decision about him when she is old enough. But she deserves the time. He looked at her for a long time. You are extraordinary. You already said that. I will keep saying it until it stops being true. Based on available evidence, that will not happen in my lifetime. She looked at the ceiling. Juneseo. Yes. It is 3 in the morning. Yes. We should sleep. Probably. He did not move. She did not move either. Tell me about the first year. Your first year with her. And Yemi, at a kitchen table in Seoul at 3 in the morning, began to talk. She talked for 2 hours. About Ji-yeon at birth, the specific quality of her arrival into the world, the absolute certainty with which she had announced herself. About the first weeks, the terrifying learning curve of early motherhood that nobody fully prepares you for. About going back to work at 3 months because she needed the structure and the income and the specific satisfaction of being good at something outside of the apartment walls. About her mother flying from Lagos to stay for 2 months and how that had saved her in ways she was still discovering. About Ji-yeon's first word, which was not mama or dada but something that sounded distinctly like the Yoruba word for water and which Ji-yeon had deployed with clear communicative intent while pointing at a glass on the table. She pointed correctly. She knew exactly what she was saying. Of course she did, Juneseo said. She started walking at 10 months, which is early. She walked like she had decided this was the next thing, and she was going to do it efficiently. He was listening with everything he had. She could see him filing each thing, holding it, turning it over, understanding that this was 5 years of his daughter being given to him in installments and he was going to keep every one. They talked until the sky outside the kitchen window began to lighten. At some point they had both moved from the table to the counter, standing closer without either of them noting the shift. At some point the cups of tea had been replaced with glasses of water. At some point the conversation had moved from Ji-yeon's first years to other things, the shape of Yemi's life in Lagos, the shifts she preferred, the colleagues who had become family. The specific Sunday afternoons when she cooked her mother's egusi recipe and Ji-yeon helped and made it significantly more complicated than it needed to be. At some point, in the pale early morning light of a kitchen in Seoul, she realized she was laughing. Telling him something about Ji-yeon at 3 and the business formal phase, and she was laughing and he was looking at her with the expression she had loved most from the very beginning, the one that arrived before his management of it could engage, and the wall in her chest had not just cracked. It had started, in the small hours of the morning without her permission, to come down. Yemi. Yes. Can I tell you something? Yes. I have been trying very hard for 3 years not to want things I could not find. I have been very disciplined about it. I am good at discipline. I know. I have been telling myself that finding you was about doing the right thing. about accountability and fairness and what was owed to you for what was done. He paused. Sitting here with you at 5 in the morning, I cannot maintain that story. It was never about accountability. It was always about you. He held her gaze. I wanted you. I have wanted you for 6 years. 5 of those years were arranged. One of them was mine. And I am sitting here at 5 in the morning understanding that whatever the next years are, those are mine to earn. You're going to have to earn them. I know. I am not easy. I know that too.
I have always known that.
It was one of the things I loved about you. She looked at him for a long moment. Ji-yeon will be awake in 2 hours. Yes. And she will want breakfast, and she will have opinions about what kind of breakfast. Yes. And we have a conversation with your father to get through today. Yes. So, we should sleep. Yes. Neither of them moved. She looked at him in the pale soul morning light. This man who had been dead and was not, who had been looking for her and had been blocked, who had sat on a playroom floor for 2 hours helping his daughter dress an elephant in business formal attire because she asked him to. Junaseo. Yes. Don't be late to breakfast. And she went to bed. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the space where she had been and felt the specific thing that happens when something you have been reaching for 3 years finally touches your hand. Not quite held yet, not certain, but contact.
Real.
Actual contact. He went to bed. He slept for exactly 6 hours. He was at the breakfast table before anyone else, including Ji-yeon, which was not something that happened often based on what Yemi had told him last night. He sat and waited. Ji-yeon arrived first. She stopped when she saw him. You are early. Yes. I am also early. Most people are not early. It is a quality. She assessed him. You may sit with me. Thank you. She climbed into the chair across from him with Director Kwon under her arm and placed the elephant on the table between them and looked at Junaseo with the specific focused quality that he was beginning to understand was simply the default setting of his daughter's attention. Do you live in this house?
No.
I have my own house in Seoul. Is it big? Yes. Bigger than this one? Similar. She considered this. Does it have a playroom? He looked at her. It will. By next week. Ji-yeon nodded, apparently satisfied with this commitment. Will there be better elephants? The finest available. Director Kwon has high standards. He will need to approve any new additions to his staff. Of course. With complete seriousness. Ji-yeon looked at him. I like you. He was very quiet for a moment. I like you too. Very much. Good. Then we can be friends. Daddy-daughter friends are different from regular friends. Mummy told me. What is different about them? They are permanent. Regular friends can change. Daddy-daughter friends are permanent. He held her gaze.
Yes.
They are. Yemi appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stopped when she saw them. Junaseo at the table and Ji-yeon across from him with Director Kwon between them, discussing the permanent nature of their friendship. She looked at the scene for a moment. Then she came in and made tea, and did not look at either of them for approximately 4 minutes, because she needed the time. The conversation with Park Il-suk happened after breakfast. Junaseo walked in first. He stood with his hands in his pockets, and the specific flat quality in his expression that Yemi had come to understand was his version of maximum composure under maximum strain. Park Il-suk was in the chair. I want to understand. Not to forgive. Not to have a resolution that makes everyone feel better. I want to understand the decision you made. From inside it. Not the explanation you have been preparing. His father looked at him. I have told Yemi, tell me. So he told him. Every part of it. The call from Lagos.
The fear.
The calculation. The specific decision-making process of a man who had spent 40 years making decisions about other people's lives and had, in that particular moment, made one too many. Junaseo listened to all of it without interrupting. When his father finished, the room was very quiet. You decided that what I was becoming with her was a liability. Answer what I asked. Quietly. A long pause. Yes. And you removed the liability. Yes. And then sent transfers for 2 years because you thought that was how you compensated for a human decision. I was trying. She returned every single one. Juneseo's voice remained steady, but the weight behind it was immovable. For 2 years, every single transfer returned. Do you understand what that means? She was a nurse in Lagos raising our daughter alone on one salary, and every month when you sent money, she sent it back. Not because she did not need it, because she understood that keeping it would mean accepting that what you did could be paid for. He held his father's gaze. She refused to allow you to make it transactional. For 2 full years she refused. And then you stopped sending it because I imagine you began to understand that there was not enough money in the organization to make this transactional. Park Il-suk said nothing. I looked for her for 3 years. You blocked me for 2 of those years. You sat across from me in this house and in my office and listened to me tell you that something was wrong with the story, and you redirected me. Deliberately. Every time. He held his father's gaze. I need you to sit with what that was. Not what it cost you.
What it cost me.
What it cost her. What it cost a child who grew up in Lagos without a father because you decided her existence did not fit your plans. The silence was long.
Yes.
I will sit with it. You will do more than sit with it.
You will say it.
Plainly. To her face. Not the version where you explain yourself. Not the version where you describe your fear and your calculation and make it understandable. The plain version. That what you did was wrong. That Ji-yeon and Yemi deserved better than what you gave them. Park Il-suk looked at his son.
Yes.
I will. And then whatever time you have left is for Ji-yeon. She has a right to know her grandfather. She will decide, when she is old enough, what kind of relationship she wants with you. But she needs the time to make that decision. You will not manage her or arrange her. You will simply be available and honest, and let her decide. Yes. Those are the terms. His father looked at him for a long moment. You are better at this than I was. I had a better example of what not to do. And then the unexpected thing happened. Park Il-suk looked at his son. This son he had shaped and protected and controlled and wronged. This son who was standing in front of him with the moral authority that came from being right, and his expression did something that Yemi, watching from the doorway, had not expected. It broke. Not with drama. Not with sound. Simply, the face of a man who has been holding something for a very long time finally releasing it. I am sorry. To Juneseo. Not as strategy. Not as management. Simply and plainly, and with the full weight of a man who means it, and knows it is not enough. Juneseo looked at his father for a long moment. I know. And he left the room. Yemi moved to follow him. Park Il-suk looked at her before she reached the door. Yemi. She stopped. I need to say it to you. The way he asked. The plain version. She turned. What I did was wrong. What I took from you, from Ji-yeon, was wrong. It cannot be paid for, and it cannot be undone, and I know that. I arranged your grief, and I arranged your daughter's missing years, and I did it deliberately, and I knew what I was doing, and it was wrong. He held her gaze. You both deserved better than what I gave you. That is all. She looked at him. She looked at the dying man in the chair who had arranged 5 years of her life and was now sitting with the full knowledge of what that meant with nobody left to deflect to. Thank you. For saying it plainly. She left the room. She found Juneseo in the garden. He was standing at the far wall looking at the trees his mother had planted before she died. She walked to him. She did not say anything. She stood beside him and looked at the trees. She planted those. Without turning. My mother. She planted them when I was 12. She said she wanted to plant things that would outlast her. They are beautiful. She would have loved Ji-yeon.
Yes.
I think so too. He turned to look at her. I want to come to Lagos. Not to live, he added quickly. Not immediately. But I want to see your apartment and meet the colleagues you have told me about and know what your Sunday mornings look like. I want Ji-yeon to know me in your world, as well as mine. My apartment is not the size of this garden. Good. I have spent enough time in spaces this size. She looked at him. Juneseo. Yes. If you come to Lagos. Yes. You follow Ji-yeon's schedule. She has school. She has activities. She has an organizational system for her week that I have been asked not to interfere with. I would not dream of interfering. Entirely serious. And you meet her teachers. They are important to her. Of course. And you cook with her on Sundays. She helps with the agusi. She takes the task seriously. She will give you instructions. I will follow them. You will burn something. Probably. But I will try very hard not to. She looked at him. She looked at this man in this garden in this complicated October morning and felt the specific quality of something she had spent 5 years refusing to name because naming it required risking something she could not afford to risk. She could afford it now. Junesio. Yes. When you come to Lagos, she paused. Yes. I am not going to make it easy. I have 5 years of... I know. And I have Ji-yeon to think about first. I know. And there will be days when I am angry about the years, and I will not be able to hide it, and... Yemi. She stopped. He stepped closer. I know. All of it. I know. And I am not asking for easy. I am not asking for fast. I am asking for the chance to be in the room. To be the person you call when something happens. To know the version of you that exists in Lagos in your apartment with your plants and your agusi soup and the daughter we made together, who runs a corporate governance structure for a toy elephant. He held her gaze. That is what I am asking for. She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand. He looked at their joined hands. You have cold hands. I always have cold hands. I remember. And she looked up at him. At this man who remembered that she had cold hands, who had spent 3 years looking for her, who had sat on a playroom floor adding a pocket square to Director Kwon because his daughter asked him to, and the wall finished coming down. Don't let go. Quietly. I will not. I have been trying to hold on for 6 years. I have the practice. She looked at the trees his mother planted. He held her hand in the Songbukdong garden, and the October light came through the leaves, and Ji-yeon could be heard somewhere in the house explaining something to Mr. Shin with what sounded like charts. It was enough. More than enough. 3 days later, Yemi and Ji-yeon were scheduled to fly home. Ji-yeon announced at breakfast on the second day that she had revised her timeline and would require an additional 2 days. When Yemi asked on what basis she had made this revision, Ji-yeon said she had conducted a review of available activities and found the initial timeline insufficient for proper completion. Yemi looked at Junesio across the breakfast table. He looked back at her with an expression of complete innocence. Did you have anything to do with this? I may have mentioned to her that Seoul has a specific market where one can find elephant accessories of exceptional quality. Ji-yeon nodded gravely. Director Kwon requires appropriate accessories. This is non-negotiable. Yemi looked at the ceiling. 2 days. Ji-yeon returned to her breakfast, satisfied. Juneseo looked at Yemi over his coffee. The quietest, most private version of the thing his face did when something pleased him. You did that on purpose. I provided accurate information. What she did with it was her own decision. She is 5. She is a 5-year-old who is going to make that decision regardless. I simply gave her the relevant data. Yemi pressed her lips together. You are going to be a problem. Possibly. But I will try very hard not to be. Those 2 extra days had a different quality from the first ones. The first days had been about the size of things, the weight of the revelation, the complexity of the history, the specific enormous work of understanding what had happened and what it meant and what came next. These days were smaller, quieter. The work of 2 people learning how to exist in the same space again after 5 years of being in completely separate ones. Juneseo took them to see his city. Not the formal version, not the organizational geography or the power landmarks. His soul. The specific coffee place near his office where he had taken meetings for 8 years and where the owner greeted him like family. The market in Insadong where his mother used to take him on Saturday mornings when he was small. The park near his apartment where he ran in the mornings and where the ginkgo trees were, in October, the specific gold that Yemi had not expected and that Ji-yeon immediately declared, the best color of anything ever. Ji-yeon collected 3 fallen ginkgo leaves and informed Juneseo she was taking them home as documentation. Documentation of what? That this happened.
Simply.
He looked at her. Then he looked at Yemi. She met his gaze and saw in it the specific thing that arrived when Ji-yeon said something that was too large for 5 years old, and neither of them knew what to do with it except feel it. They walked through a city and Ji-yeon asked questions of every person who would engage with her and Jun-so translated the answers, and Yemi watched her daughter navigate this other world with the specific complete confidence of a child who has decided that the world is hers to understand. She had his confidence. She had always had it. Yemi had always attributed it to Ji-yeon's own character, and she had not been wrong. It was Ji-yeon's own character, but watching it in Seoul, in the same streets where Jun-so had grown up, she could see where it had come from. On the last afternoon they sat in the park with the golden ginkgo trees. Ji-yeon had fallen asleep on the bench between them, which happened rarely and always felt like a gift, the specific gift of a usually very awake child simply going quiet and trusting the people beside her, with her head on Yemi's lap and her feet somehow having migrated to rest against Joe's leg. He looked down at her feet against him. He did not move. He sat very still in the specific way of a person who does not want to disturb something. Yemi watched him. "What are you thinking about?" Quietly. "The first year." Without looking up. "You told me about it at the kitchen table. I keep going back through it. He paused. "She had a fever at 7 months. You told me. You spent 3 nights checking her temperature every hour." "Yes." "I wasn't there."
No.
"I should have been there."
Yes.
"You should have been." He was quiet for a moment. "I cannot fix the past. I know that. I know there is no version of this where I get what was taken back. But I want you to know," he looked up at her. "I want to be there for everything from here. Every fever. Every schedule revision. Every board meeting Ji-yeon calls for Director Kwon. I want to be there." Yemi held his gaze. "Then be there. Even from Seoul? You are the head of an organization that operates across 6 countries. I suspect you can manage Lagos." "I can manage Lagos. I will manage Lagos." She looked at him. "I know you will." He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear.
Gently.
In the specific way he had touched her face in the room the first day, like something still fragile being handled correctly. "Yemi." "Yes." "In Lagos?" "Yes." "On Sundays?" "Yes." "I am going to learn to make egusi soup. Properly. Not burning it. Ji-yeon will teach you. She has a method. It is very specific. I will follow the method. She will critique your chopping. I expect nothing less." She smiled. He looked at her smile. "There." "There what?" "I have been trying to find that smile since the morning I woke up in your hospital, and you told me that it is literally your job for things to matter to you. That is the first time I saw it." She looked away. "Jun-so." "Yes." "Stop."
Why?
"Because I need to be practical. And you make it very difficult to be practical." "I know. This is something I intend to make progressively more difficult over time." "That is a threat." "It is a promise." She looked at their sleeping daughter between them. Ji-yeon with her warm mixed skin and her Korean features and her father's eyes closed in trust against Yemi's lap, her feet resting without ceremony against her father's leg. "What do we tell people? At home.
About you.
About what this is. Tell them the truth. The full truth."
Yes.
"All of it. I am done with the version of my life that required any part of it to be concealed." He held her gaze. "You are not something I am going to conceal. Ji-yeon is not something I am going to conceal. This is not something I am going to conceal. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, it is real, and it is mine, and I am going to say so plainly to anyone who asks. Even your organization? Especially my organization. They will adapt. And if they don't, then they don't."
Simply.
"I am 32 years old, and I have been running things since I was 22, and I have arranged my life around the organization for 10 years. I am now going to arrange some of my life around other things." He held her gaze. "Around better things. That is a very significant shift for the most feared man in Seoul."
Yes.
"You should take responsibility for some of that." "I was minding my own business. You were the one who got yourself admitted to my hospital. With some assistance from my father's strategic decisions."
Yes.
There is a lot your father has answers for. He looked at Ji-yeon sleeping between them. She forgave him.
Just like that.
At dinner last night, she just decided he was her grandfather, and that was the arrangement. She is 5. She does not carry things the way we do. She decided he was hers, and she kept him. It is a generous way to be. It is the right way to be. He does not have much time. What time he has is hers, if she wants it.
She paused.
I will watch carefully. I will not allow her to be hurt. But I will not take the choice from her. He looked at her. You are a remarkable mother. I have had excellent material to work with. He looked at Ji-yeon.
Yes.
You have. They sat in the park until Ji-yeon woke up, which she did without the groggy confusion of most children, coming awake with the specific immediate presence that was hers, and looked up at both of them and said, I have been thinking about Director Kwan's succession plan. Jun Seo looked at Yemi. Yemi looked at Jun Seo. We should discuss it over dinner. Jun Seo said seriously. Agreed. Ji-yeon sat up. Do you have a notebook? I need to make a record. He produced a small notebook from his jacket pocket. She took it without ceremony and opened it and looked at the blank page, and then looked at him. You hold the pen wrong. You have told me. I will fix it again. Please. And she adjusted his grip with the same matter-of-fact authority as before, and then put the pen to the paper and began, at 5 years old, to outline Director Kwan's organizational succession in a Seoul park in October, while her parents sat on either side of her and looked at each other over her head with the specific expression of two people who have been through something enormous and have come out on the other side of it in a golden park with a child between them who is writing succession. Plans for a toy elephant. There was nothing to say to that. They simply sat there, together, in the Seoul afternoon, being the thing they had been arranged away from for 5 years and had found their way back to on their own terms, in their own time, through their own choice. That was what it meant. That was what all of it had meant. On the day they left Seoul, Park Il-suk came to say goodbye. He stood in the entryway of the house, slowly, with the effort that everything cost him now, and looked at Ji-yeon in her coat with her carry-on bag and Director Kwan under her arm and the 3 ginkgo leaves in a small envelope that she had decided needed their own luggage space. Ji-yeon looked at him. She walked over to him. She looked up at him for a moment with those precise dark park eyes. Then she held up Director Kwan. You can hold him, if you want. Park Il-suk looked at the elephant. He took him. He held the toy elephant in his thin hands and looked at his granddaughter looking up at him, and something in his face did the quiet breaking thing again. He is very well dressed. His voice was rough. I know. I have standards.
Yes.
I can see that. She looked at him. Will you be here when we come back? He looked at Yemi. Yemi held his gaze. She did not answer for him. It was his answer to give. He looked back at Ji-yeon. I will try. Very hard. Ji-yeon nodded. She took Director Kwan back. Trying hard is sufficient. And she went to join Jun Seo by the door. Park Il-suk looked at Yemi. She held his gaze for a moment. Thank you. For coming. She thought about all the things she could say. All the things she was still carrying and would continue to carry. All the years and the grief and the transfers returned. She will come back. She has decided you are her grandfather. You know what that means. Permanent.
Yes.
Even for you. She left him standing in the entryway with that word. At the airport, Jun Seo came through security with them, not to a gate he was flying from, simply to be there until the last possible moment. Ji-yeon held his hand through the whole security line and told him her observations about the airport design, which she found efficient but lacking in color. I will pass that on. Please do. I have notes. He crouched at the departure gate. Ji-yeon looked at him. You will come to Lagos. Not a question. Yes. Soon. Also not a question. Soon. She considered him. You should bring something. What would you like me to bring? She thought about it with great seriousness. Yugali flour. Mummy says the Korean kind is different, but she does not know if it is better or worse. You should bring some for a comparative study. He looked at her. I will bring yugali flour. And you should call me before you come, so I can prepare a schedule. Of course. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she reached out and hugged him. Not dramatically. Simply. The complete, uncalculated hug of a child who has decided that someone is hers and is communicating it in the most direct way available. He held her. He held his daughter in an airport departure gate in Seoul and closed his eyes for a moment. Yemi watched. She had told herself she was going to be practical. She had been telling herself this for 5 years. She was going to be practical about this man and this reunion and all the complexity that came with both, and she was going to maintain her walls and her careful distance, and she was going to… He looked at her over Ji-yeon's shoulder. His expression was entirely, completely open. She crossed the distance. She did not overthink it. She simply crossed the distance and she put her arms around him and Ji-yeon and she held them both and felt the full 5 years of it. The grief and the building and the returning of every transfer and the 3 in the morning conversations and the ginkgo park and all of it come through her chest like something finally, after all this time, landing. He held her. He held them both. He held them like a man who has been reaching for something for 6 years and has finally, in an airport in Seoul on an October morning, understood that he is holding it. Egusi soup. Against her hair. Next Sunday. Don't burn it. Against his shoulder. I will try very hard. Ji-yeon between them said, you will both need to focus. They pulled back. They looked at each other. Something settled between them that had been unsettled for 6 years and would need more time and more Sundays and more egusi soup and more Ji-yeon succession plans before it was fully resolved. But that was, in this moment, in this airport, in the specific October light of Seoul, entirely and beautifully and sufficiently in place. See you Sunday. See you Sunday. She took Ji-yeon's hand and they walked to the gate. At the door she turned. He was still there. He had not moved. He raised his hand slightly, not a wave, just an acknowledgement. I am still here. She looked at him for one more second. Then she walked through the gate. On the plane, Ji-yeon sat in the window seat and took out her notebook, the one Jun Seo had given her, and began writing. What are you writing? My notes from Seoul. For my records. Yemi looked at the notebook.
Ji-yeon.
What do you think about what happened? About meeting your daddy? Ji-yeon looked up from the notebook. She considered the question with the specific seriousness she brought to all significant questions. He holds his pen wrong. But he listens correctly. And he sat on the floor.
Yes.
He did. People who sit on floors are serious people. It means they are willing to be at your level. Yemi looked at her daughter.
Yes.
That is exactly what it means. Ji-yeon returned to her notes. Yemi looked out the window at Seoul disappearing below the clouds. She thought about the hospital and 11 hours of surgery and a man who is not afraid, just very, very careful. She thought about a corner restaurant and a first laugh and 4 months of evenings that had felt like the architecture of something real. She thought about a phone call and 5 years of returns. She thought about a letter and a flight and an old man on his knees and a child who had decided, with the magnificent simplicity of 5 years old, that he was hers. She thought about a man at an airport gate who had not moved until she was through the door. Some things could not be arranged into or out of existence. You could arrange the circumstances. You could remove the proximity. You could disconnect the number and arrange the grief and redirect the search for 3 years. But you could not arrange the thing itself. The thing itself was its own structure. Built in 11 hours of surgery and 40 minutes of jollof rice and 1 Lagos corner restaurant and 5 years of a child with her father's eyes looking back at Yemi every single morning. It was built, and it was real, and it had withstood every arrangement made against it. It always would. Some love stories need perfect conditions to survive. This one needed none. It survived a faked death, 5 years of absence, 2 years of return transfers, and a dying man's arrangements, and it came out the other side in a Seoul park with a 5-year-old writing succession plans for a toy elephant. Yemi Adeyinka returned every transfer for 2 years and built everything herself and showed up in Seoul anyway because her daughter deserved the whole truth. Park Jun-seo spent 3 years looking for a woman he had been told left him because something in him that his father could arrange around but could not arrange away told him the story was wrong. And Ji-yeon, who had her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn, extraordinary precision, looked at a man she had never met, and decided in 30 seconds that he was hers. That is the most powerful thing in the story. Not the reunion. Not the revelation. A 5-year-old who looked at a stranger and said, "Permanent." Now tell me, do you think Park Il-suk deserved to hold Ji-yeon before he died? He arranged 5 years of grief. But he also arranged the letter that brought them back together. Is the ending what you hoped for or what you expected? And the question I think you have been sitting with since part 1, if you were Yemi, would you have gone to Seoul? Or would you have protected yourself and Ji-yeon and never looked back? Tell me your answer, and tell me your city. If this story moved you, if any part of it sat in your chest the way it was meant to, subscribe to Afro-Soul Connect, drop a like, and send this to someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who returned every single transfer and built everything herself and then walked into the house of the man who arranged her grief because her daughter deserved the whole truth. That is who Yemi Adeyinka is. And we will be back with a new story next week.
See you then.